The Majority Whip.
Mr. President, I've served in the House and Senate for a number of years. One of the issues that has always been of interest to me is tobacco. I lost my father to lung cancer when I was 14 years old. He was 53. 2 packs of Camels a day, and he died of lung cancer. I've thought about that a lot throughout my life. When I was elected to the House of Representatives, I decided to start asking a few questions about tobacco and government subsidies and government policies. It was not the most popular position I ever took within the House of Representatives. There was generally a rule, or at least a custom, of never raising the issue. I did. It resulted in a decision by the House of Representatives that surprised almost everyone. I introduced an amendment to ban smoking on airplanes. It was opposed by not only my own party leadership, but the leadership of the Republican Party, and yet we prevailed. It turned out that the members of the House of Representatives represented one of the largest frequent flyer clubs in America, and they were sick and tired of secondhand smoke in airplanes. I called on Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey to be my ally on this side of the rotunda, and he was successful in passing the legislation with me, which was signed into law. People started asking obvious questions about secondhand smoke. If it's dangerous in an airplane, why is it not dangerous on a train, in a bus, at a hospital, at an office building, at a restaurant? So to my surprise, this measure to make clean air more prevalent on airplanes ended up being a tipping point in American history on tobacco policy. Everything started changing, and fast. Lives were saved. People were discouraged from smoking. Tobacco companies, which had been untouchable to that point, were not only touchable, they were vulnerable. And they had to sit down and devise a new policy to make money. Now, the premise of tobacco was to entice young people to start smoking at an early age. And the chemicals in tobacco, like nicotine, were addictive. People knew in the tobacco industry that if you could drag kids into smoking at an early age and get them addicted, they might face a lifetime of that addiction and ultimately die from it. But they would have loyal customers to the tobacco companies, and they would continue to make money. When we started raising questions about tobacco, the tobacco companies needed an alternative. They found it. Do you know what it was? E-cigarettes, vaping. The tobacco companies made big investments in these companies, selling them as a new marketable product that was a lot safer, though it wasn't, and creating addictions among children by advertising and selling fruit-flavored, bubblegum-flavored vaping devices that looked an awful lot like something you'd carry around for your computer. Visit a high school in America today in your state, or a junior high, middle school for that matter. Ask the teachers and administrators, what's the prevalence of vaping and e-cigarettes among the kids in these schools? You'll be shocked to learn. Kids mistakenly believe that these are harmless, yet they're extremely addictive, e-cigarettes and vaping. And so I contacted the Food and Drug Administration, which has the legal authority to regulate these products, and said, what are you going to do about it? Well, they weren't quite sure what to do about it, and that's why I came to the floor today to tell you up to date what was just announced. The decade-long delay from the Food and Drug Administration to properly regulate e-vaping and e-cigarettes is in a league of its own in the modern history of that agency. You see, under the law known as pre-market review, no tobacco product, and vaping is a tobacco product using tobacco chemicals like nicotine, no tobacco product is permitted on store shelves unless the producer, the manufacturer, proves, listen, proves to the Food and Drug Administration in advance, prior to selling the product on the market, that it is, quote, appropriate for the protection of public health. For years, the Food and Drug Administration, despite this charge under the law, has ignored it. Instead, they set back as millions of e-cigarettes in fruit, mint, candy flavors, even with cartoon images, were illegally flooding the market and addicting America's children. The Food and Drug Administration watched as this happened. It was so bad that in year 2019, 4 years ago, a federal judge intervened, ruling that the Food and Drug Administration, quote, decided not to enforce the pre-market review provisions at all. In other words, the court found what I've just said to be the fact. The law said you need approval ahead of time before you can sell this product. The industry, tobacco industry, e-vaping industry, ignored it, sold these products nationwide, addicting these children, and ignored their responsibilities under law. So in 2019, this federal court ordered the Food and Drug Administration to enforce the law, to review all e-cigarette applications as the law requires, and gave them a deadline to get it done. It was almost 2 years later, September 9th, 2021. That was more than 16 months ago, and still the Food and Drug Administration has not finished its job. In that time, while the FDA has dithered, dallied, and delayed, more than 1 million of America's kids have started vaping. How could our federal regulators be so passive and so ineffective? Then on Tuesday, this last Tuesday, in a stunning filing to the federal judge, the Food and Drug Administration disclosed that it'll take another 6 months, another 6-month delay in fulfilling the public health duty announced by the court years ago, that the Food and Drug Administration will not finish reviewing applications for the most popular e-cigarettes until the end of 2023. Another outrageous delay. I don't think I've ever heard of a federal agency defying a court order for 2 years. I'm going to leave it up to the federal court to assess this development. But how can this federal agency knowingly, willingly ignore this court order to protect America's children? How can they ignore the fact that the law requires their approval of a product before it goes on the shelf, and these products are being sold across America without that approval? To this senator, the Food and Drug Administration's deference to the tobacco industry, at the risk of 1 million more children in the next 6 months getting addicted to nicotine over the next year, is just plain outrageous and indefensible. The Food and Drug Administration has one choice, 3 words: follow the law. Immediately halt the unauthorized sale of these e-cigarettes on the market. Not next year, not next month, immediately today. Otherwise, this agency and the people who guide it bear responsibility for the result. And that result is the addiction of children to a product which will harm their health. Otherwise, the Food and Drug Administration is complicit in endangering the health of America's kids. Think about that for a second. An agency created over a century ago to protect American consumers is in fact failing to protect the most vulnerable American consumers, our children. The Food and Drug Administration has the authority today, before the end of this business day, to order vaping products off the market, period. Do it. Don't wait till some attorney talks you out of it at the Food and Drug Administration. Protect America's kids. Tell the tobacco industry, sorry, the party's over. You'll never prove that what you sell is in the interest of public health. And we're going to protect kids first and deal with the lawyers later. In the free pass, follow the law. Do not allow these tobacco companies one more day of preying on our children. Mr. President, I'd like to ask permission that the next statement be placed at a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, America must never become a safe haven for anyone who assaults the values for which this nation stands. Values like democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and the sanctity of free and fair elections. We already deny visas to those who are human traffickers, drug traffickers, money launderers, corrupt kleptocrats, and those who commit serious violations of religious freedom. I agree with that policy. We have passed laws to allow for the prosecution in U.S. courts of anyone who has committed war crimes or used children as soldiers in deadly conflict. I've written some of those policies, and I certainly agree with them. Today, I am introducing legislation to further align our immigration system with our values as a nation. The bill I'm introducing would prevent foreign officials who interfere with democratic elections or prevent the democratic transfer of power in their country from taking refuge in the United States. In recent years, autocrats around the world have used a toxic brew of nationalism, authoritarianism, corruption, and social media to weaken and attack the very foundations of democracy. Fortunately, democracy is winning this battle. Much of the world has unified in support of Ukraine, for example, against Putin's attempt to seize the sovereign democratic nation of Ukraine. And we have the allies in the NATO alliance and others who stand with us with strength and formidable determination to stop Putin. In late October, the people of Brazil, the largest democracy in Latin America, chose a new president to replace the increasingly authoritarian Jair Bolsonaro. After years of baseless lies by Bolsonaro about the integrity of Brazil's elections, polls show that 3/4 of his supporters no longer trust the electoral process in Brazil. Sound familiar? After Bolsonaro lost in October's presidential election, his supporters turned to violence. They blocked highways throughout Brazil. Many called openly for the military to overturn the election. Sound familiar? And on January 8th, as Mr. Bolsonaro took selfies with his supporters in the state of Florida, thousands of his far-right supporters violently stormed Brazil's presidential palace, Congress, and Supreme Court, breaking windows and injuring dozens of police officers. Sound familiar? It was a disgrace. It was an assault on democracy, not only in Brazil, but assault on democracy everywhere. Under the bill I'm introducing, if the Secretary of State determines a foreign official has interfered with free and fair elections or sought to prevent the peaceful democratic transfer of power, that official cannot escape justice by fleeing to the United States. I ask my colleagues to join in supporting this important measure to hold those who interfere with democratic elections accountable. America should never be a safe haven for enemies of democracy. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.